Sandra Witelson was here last time because over the years she, as a neurologist, has amassed quite an amazing collection of brains, which she studies as a scientist, and in particular, she has parts of Einstein's brain in her lab at McMaster University, just down the road. And so at the time, I invited her to come here and to explain to us what she learned from the study of that particular brain and why he may have been Albert Einstein and why we are not. Not too long ago, a guy called Larry Summers, a famous guy in the United States, advisor to presidents, and at the time the president of Harvard University, was literally hounded out of his job because he suggested that there was something innate in the brain of women that led to the fact that they were not so well represented in the sciences and in the maths. This broke a cardinal rule of political correctness. He was savaged and eventually had to retreat because the story is there is no difference. That's what politically correct narrative requires. Sandra, on the other hand, thinks there is a difference. So that's how I squared the circle. I've invited Sandra to come back and tell us whether or not there is an innate physical difference between men's brains and women's brains.
Well, thank you, Moses, for bringing me back. So what I want to talk about today is really almost 180 degrees different from what you just heard in terms of the environmental issues relating to being a man or a woman. What I want to talk about is your most intimate organ, your most sexually intimate organ, obviously the brain. And what I want to talk about, sort of cutting right to the chase, so that you know where I'm going, is the fact that the brains are different. I mean, it's 16 minutes and I just started. That the brains are different between men and women. They're different between infant boys and infant girls. They're different between boys and girls. They're different between men and women. They're different between males and females of all mammalian species. So this is not a brand new idea. This has been in the philosophical writings from even the time of Aristotle, from a long time ago. It has been in the social, psychological literature for a long time. What is new, because this is a form of new ideas, what is new is the fact that it is not an idea anymore, it is a fact. The brains are different. They are different because there are hard data that are reproducible coming out in the last 20, 30 years from laboratories, studies across the world. The brains are different in structure. They're different in chemistry. They're different in the connectivity patterns, in the organization of how they're put together. That's how the brain works, in the sense that one neuron talks to another by sending an impulse down a connecting axon. So the connectivity is crucial, and patterns of connectivity are different between men and women. So the message that I want to give you is that it is okay to think that the brains of men and women are different. In fact, I'm going to argue that I think it's essential for the betterment of society and for men and women in general. And to make sure that, let me bring out my little home PowerPoint here. So the brain, as you know, is the organ of thinking and the organ of behavior. It is the organ of all behavior and all thinking. You might think that this is a trivial comment, but it isn't. It means that everything you do, you think, you feel, you act is a consequence of your brain. In fact, it took, for example, the Nobelist, Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the structure of the DNA molecule, when he left molecular biology and went into neuroscience, one of the last frontiers of a lot of unknown, unfinished business, he wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis. And what he was saying was astonishing, is that not only is all thinking and behavior, but even that sort of highest level kind of thinking, consciousness, our self-consciousness, our awareness that we are thinking, that too is the function of the brain. So, if the brain is the organ of our thinking and behavior, and if the brain is different between men and women, obviously there are going to be some differences in the thinking and the behavior between men and women. It doesn't mean that there aren't gross similarities. It doesn't mean that environmental, social, cultural, learning aspects don't modify a lot of what we have genetically. But what it means is that there are hardwired genetic differences. So how does the brain get to be sexually differentiated? The brain gets to be sexually differentiated in the same way that the genitalia and the reproductive organs get to be sexually differentiated. As you know, we have an XX, we have a pair of sex chromosomes. If you're a woman, you have 2 X chromosomes. If you're a man, you have an XY. The biology at this point is not that crucial. Many of you must know this. But the point is that from the time of conception, you are determined whether you're going to be an XX or an XY in the majority of cases. Sometimes the process is slightly different, and that may lead to some more ambiguous cases, but that's a very small percentage of the population. As soon as one is an XY, the Y chromosome determines that the primordial gonads become testes as opposed to ovaries. And once you have testes, you have testosterone. And once you have testosterone, you have the masculinization of certain organs, such as the external genitalia, which everybody could see, so they know what is going on, unless you choose to pretend that you don't know. Or the reproductive system, even muscles. Muscles have 2 kinds of fibers, fast twitch, slow twitch. These too are genetically determined. So that in transgendered individuals, where surgery and hormonal treatment at maturity can change a lot about an individual, it cannot change the morphology of the muscles. And so you think what this means is that if you have a different, and men and women have a different proportion of the type 1 and type 2 muscles. So that if you have these differences, when you are a transgendered individual, you still have genetically determined aspects of your muscles. And so what does this mean for you when you are moving? And what does this mean, for example, for competitive athletes? And I mean, I'll just leave that out with you to see that this is a sort of a very complicated situation. So we have these hardwired structural chemical things in the brain that are different. And what are some of the things that are different? This is in the newspapers a lot. There are differences in language. Little girls learn language faster. Women tend to be more fluent. They have better verbal memory. On the other hand, there are other differences where men, for example, use metaphors in their language more frequently. There are differences in quantitation. And of course, we're talking about mean tendencies, so that just like in height, you could have some men who might even be shorter than I am, and vice versa. But in general, I'm talking about mean tendencies. On average, men do better in certain kinds of mathematical quantitation skills. And it was actually that particular fact that past President Lawrence Summers of Harvard University used to suggest why there were so many fewer women, tenured women, full professors in Ivy League universities, which he said, these are the best, so if you might as well be 5 standard deviations above the average in your mathematical ability in order to get these jobs. And it was not well received, as Moses said. So you have many of these differences. But I want to talk about some other differences that maybe don't get as much public press. And that is, studies have shown that on average, women are more risk adverse in their choices of activities, how they deal, particularly in their non-familial work. Women make choices where there is more security. Women are, in surveys when they are asked, women on average are less interested in amassing fortunes. Women are less interested in trying to develop or create a new product. So that there are many differences even at the personality temperament level that are going to affect how men and women are out there in the workforce. Studies have shown that even the response to stress, sort of acute stress, leads to differences biologically in men and women. So that when there is an acute stressor, the part of the brain that is involved in learning, in a male brain, what happens is more little dendrites and spines are developed, which facilitate learning. In a woman under acute stress, the opposite happens. These little spines and synapses are retracted, which is not good for learning on the spot. So you have situations, and there are many, many examples, that even under daily, normal, healthy situations, the environment impinges, the same environment is impinging on 2 different organs and have consequences. So what does this sort of tell us, and where does it lead? In the past 10, or let's say in the past 20 years, institutions, companies, universities, businesses have made adaptations to be more welcoming and more supportive of women in the workforce, and especially women in sort of the upper levels, aiming for the upper levels of positions in the workforce. However, there are more women than men graduating from medical schools, law schools, business schools, and yet, when surveys are done, and many have been done in the last 10 or 15 years, when one looks at where are these graduates, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years post-graduation, there's much fewer women than men out in their chosen fields from their education. So this is called, and you've heard the phrase, the leaking pipeline. So what is the cause of the leaking pipeline? To date, practically all the interpretation has been at the environmental level. Women are the ones that have to bear children. It turns out in some of the surveys, when they broke the women into 2 groups, those with and those without children, there was no difference in how they fell out of the pipeline. So that something else is going on. And what I think is happening is that it's not only the external environment that is determining some of the lack of equality in the number of positions of men and women in different walks of life. It's not only environment that is causing something, but there is the internal environment. And it is the kind of choices, the kind of things that make an individual comfortable. It's the kinds of things for which one has a motivation or a passion that is leading to differences between the number of men versus women who are in different lines of work. And so I think how I would like to end is the way I started, that it's okay to know and to accept and to act upon the fact that there are sex differences in the brains of men and women. And although there are overlapping curves and there is still variation within each sex, on average there are major differences, and that these should be recognized, and that one shouldn't pretend that they don't exist because of political correctness. By ignoring something, by disbelieving something, it doesn't make a fact go away. And I think it's essential for men and women to realize that there are some hardwired differences, and that it's only to the advantage of both sexes out there in the broad world, because women bring different aspects. Men and women bring different aspects, and I have a little quote here that I think is very telling. It's the IMF hopeful, Ms. Christina Lagarde, who said herself, I took this quote, "Women inject less libido and less testosterone into the equation. This helps in the sense that we don't necessarily project our own egos into cutting a deal." And some surveys have shown that those companies that have a higher, not higher than men, but higher than other companies, women as maybe a CEO or on the board, they actually deliver better to their stockholders in terms of the profit line. So that there's an advantage of having people who think differently. So this is important for men to know, not just to hire the women who sort of think like them, but to hire the women that maybe think differently. But on the other hand, I think it's very important for women to realize that they too have some hardwired aspects to themselves, which are not going to go away. And so if women have certain aims of where they want to go in their chosen career, in a way, they have certain hurdles to overcome. The being risk adverse, making choices to make that maybe lead to less secure positions, and that this is going to be important, I think, for women to understand who they are in terms of their own sex and what are some of the aspects that they may want to consider as they go forward. And I see that I am out of time. So thank you for your attention.
We're going to get a picture.